All right, here is a quick explanation on how to use verbs that we call stem-changing verbs in Spanish. By now, I'm expecting that you already know if I use the term infinitive, if I use the term conjugate, or how to conjugate AR, ER, or IR verbs in the present tense. We should know that by now. If you don't, you probably need to be practicing something else. So infinitive, like I've said in other videos, if I'm using the verb ser, for example, to be, uh, when I actually use it in a sentence, I have to change it or conjugate it to match the subject. So, for example, in English, I wouldn't say I to be, I would say I am. You are. You cannot say you am, I is, etc. You have to have subject verb agreement. So changing the verb is called conjugating it. And the infinitive form is the original form. So yo soy, tú eres, soy, eres. You might forget, but they come from the original form, which is ser. And I've also talked in other videos on how to use verbs in the present tense, regular verbs, because there's lots of verbs like the ones in this presentation that have special rules. And we're always looking at the last two letters of verbs, AR, ER, or IR, because those give us clues on how to use them. You might know such phrases in Spanish already, such as te quiero, which means I love you, or puedo ir al baño, can I go to the bathroom? You might have used these phrases or heard these phrases without knowing that the infinitive form of those verbs here, te quiero, the verb quiero, I love or I want, the infinitive form, the original form is querer. If you were looking super closely at this, quiero, querer, you'll notice, as usual, well, the ER is changed to an O. However, you'll notice that there's some other spelling change in the middle. The letter I came out of somewhere. And also for the verb, for the example of puedo ir al baño, the verb there, puedo, can I? You might not have known, but the original form of that verb is poder, which means can or to be able to. Just like the one before, querer, you'll notice that the ending ER follows the same rules that you should know already. The ER is changed to an O at the end. However, you'll notice that when we use it, the letter U appeared out of somewhere. So we're going to talk about that how some verbs have two spelling changes when you use them in the present tense. The ending is normal, using rules we've talked about before, but also there's a spelling change in the middle of the word. When you learn new words in the dictionary, if you're looking very carefully, you might notice that sometimes when you see a verb, it'll have a letter underlined in the middle of the word. And then it'll have a couple of letters that seem kind of randomly there in parentheses after the verb. That's to tell you that this verb has a special rule change. It's called a stem changer. And it means that when you use it in the present tense, you will change that underlined letter to the letters that are in parentheses. It's a little confusing. It feels like you're doing math almost. Change the variable to something else. But the more you see examples of it, the more it makes sense, and it'll start to sound strange if you didn't do the spelling change. So the rule is the new thing that we're learning today. When you see that underlined letter, that letter changes to the letters in parentheses. However, look at the very last thing I have written on this slide that my face is almost covering. Not for the nosotros form, and I should also say not for the vosotros form if you're practicing to speak in Spain. Those will just follow regular rules. You have to remember that the nosotros form does not apply these special spelling changes, but you'll start to remember that over time. So here are three examples. Querer, servir, poder. Here they have the letters highlighted in red instead of being underlined. And it's showing you some examples of how they not only have this spelling change at the end of the verb when you conjugate it and use it in a sentence. So quiero, I want. Quieres, you want or do you want? Quiere, he wants, she wants. Queremos, we want. Notice how there it doesn't have the change. Quieren, they want. But the spelling change is not always the same each time. It's not always the letters IE. Look at servir. Sometimes it's just the E changes to an I, or sometimes it's an O that changes to a UE. And there's several different kinds of changes. But like I said in the slide before, usually when you see it in the dictionary, it'll tell you what change to make, what letter to change and what to change it to. The underlined letter changes to the letters in parentheses, or sometimes just one letter. It's a little confusing, but the more you practice it, it's just one of those things you have to remember. And you might get some reminders from your teacher once in a while. So change the endings as normal, like you did with other regular present tense verbs. Replace the underlined letter with the letters in parentheses. But you actually have to remember, don't do this for the nosotros form or the vosotros form.